Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: creeping escalation along Israel-Lebanon border brings risk of bigger war. As the war grinds on, Ukraine needs more troops. Not everyone is ready to enlist. The invisible war in Ukraine being fought over radio waves. Civilians caught in the crossfire as fighting escalates between Myanmar military and armed group. Government defends Anthony Albanese for not raising Chinese warship incident with Xi Jinping. Creeping escalation along Israel-Lebanon border brings risk of bigger war. Washington Post. There is growing concern that the conflict between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah will escalate, as both sides increasingly employ deadlier weapons and Israel threatens to change the security situation in the north. Israeli jets reportedly struck an aluminium factory in the Lebanese town of Nabatee, 12 miles north of the border, on Saturday, which is beyond the zone in which retaliatory fire is deemed acceptable. A spokeswoman for the Israeli military said that the factory was targeted because it was being used by Hezbollah to store weapons, while Hezbollah claimed that it had shot down an Israeli drone. Both sides have warned that any full-scale conflict would be far more devastating than the war in 2006, which killed over 1,200 people in Lebanon and 165 in Israel. The UN interim force in Lebanon has stated that the risk of miscalculation and escalation is growing, and that anything one side does, the other could decide has gone too far, thereby triggering a bigger fight. As the war grinds on, Ukraine needs more troops. Not everyone is ready to enlist. CNN. Ukraine is facing a manpower shortage as its war against Russia enters its third year. The country has been relying on volunteers and a system of conscription to fill its ranks, but recruiting and training troops has become a significant challenge. The prolonged nature of the conflict, combined with limited opportunities for rotation and gaps in legislation, has reduced citizens' motivation to serve in the military. While it is difficult to determine the exact extent of the mobilization challenge, officials have acknowledged that evading military service and enforcing mobilization rules are issues. In the face of this challenge, some individuals are motivated to fight, while others are seeking to avoid enlistment. Ukraine's military needs more people in uniform to sustain the war effort and counter Russia's aggression. The prolonged conflict has put a strain on the country's resources, and the Western support Ukraine has received thus far may be at risk of wavering. The Ukrainian government needs to address the recruitment and training challenges it faces to ensure it has the manpower necessary to defend itself against Russia. The invisible war in Ukraine being fought over radio waves. New York Times. Ukraine is seeing a battle between Russia and Ukraine in the invisible realm of electromagnetic waves, with radio signals being used to overwhelm communication links to drones and troops, locate targets and trick guided weapons. Known as electronic warfare, the tactics have turned into a cat-and-mouse game between Russia and Ukraine, quietly driving momentum swings in the conflict and forcing engineers to adapt. Electronic warfare has been a feature of wars for more than 100 years, but a battle is raging in Ukraine. Electronic warfare has impacted the fighting in Ukraine as much as weather and terrain, and every operation in the conflict now has to take into account enemy moves in the electromagnetic spectrum. The techniques have turned the war into a proxy laboratory that the United States, Europe and China have followed closely for what may sway a future conflict, experts said. General Charles Q. Brown Jr., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, raised the topic of electronic warfare this year in prepared remarks for a congressional hearing. NATO countries have expanded programs to buy and develop electronic weapons, said Thomas Withington, an electronic warfare expert at the Royal United Services Institute, a British security think tank. The war in Ukraine has been the performance-enhancing drug for NATO's electromagnetic thinking, he said. It has been the thing that concentrates minds. Civilians caught in the crossfire as fighting escalates between Myanmar military and armed group. CNN. Renewed fighting between Myanmar's military and the Arakan Army, AA, has displaced over 26,000 people in the country's western Rakhine state since Monday, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNOCHA. The fighting has spread to various townships, including Pakhta, where civilians have been caught in the crossfire. Most humanitarian activities have been suspended due to the conflict, and virtually all roads and waterways between townships in Rakhine have been blocked, according to UNOCHA. The two sides had previously established an informal ceasefire in November 2022, but fighting broke out after the AA attacked two border posts. Government defends Anthony Albanese for not raising Chinese warship incident with Xi Jinping. ABC. The Australian government has defended Prime Minister Anthony Albanese over his failure to raise a naval incident with China's Navy with President Xi Jinping. The incident involved a Chinese warship operating its hull-mounted sonar, which caused injuries to Australian naval divers. The government has expressed serious concerns to China about the unsafe and unprofessional interaction. The coalition has demanded an explanation as to why the Prime Minister did not raise the matter with President Xi in person. North Korea marks missile holiday with silence as Kim absent 29 days. Japan Times. North Korea did not publicly celebrate its Missile Industry Day on Saturday, as leader Kim Jong-un has been absent from the public eye for almost a month. The holiday commemorates the launch of the Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missile last year, which is one of North Korea's most powerful weapons. The missile has the capability to deliver a nuclear bomb over 15,000 kilometers, putting the entire U.S. within striking distance. Jet crashes into Port Phillip Bay, emergency services searching water. The Sydney Morning Herald. A jet has crashed into the ocean near Mount Martha in Melbourne, Australia. Emergency services are currently searching for survivors. The aircraft is believed to be a former military plane, an S-211 Viper jet, with a pilot and passenger on board. The debris from the crash has been seen floating on the water where the search is taking place. The S-211 jet is an Italian-made fighter plane used for Air Force training. Ministers from Arab, Muslim countries to visit China in bid to end Gaza war, Saudi minister. Yahoo! Ministers from Arab and Islamic countries will visit China on Monday as the first stop on a tour aimed at ending the war in Gaza. The tour is the first step in implementing decisions reached at a joint Arab and Islamic summit held in Riyadh this month. The Saudi foreign minister stated that the ministers will convey a clear message that a ceasefire must be announced immediately and aid must be allowed in. They will then move on to other capitals to continue the effort to end the crisis and the war in Gaza as soon as possible. George Holani runs for 178 yards, 2 TDs and leading Boise State over Utah State 45-10. Associated Press. Boise State defeated Utah State with a score of 45-10 on Saturday night. George Holani was the standout player, rushing for 178 yards and 2 touchdowns. Taylon Green threw 2 touchdown passes for Boise State, while Cooper Legas completed 8 of 12 passes and threw a touchdown pass for Utah State. Both teams will play their regular season finales on Friday. UCSD knocks off Navy 73-55. Associated Press. UCSD defeated Navy 73-55 in a college basketball game on Saturday night. Bryce Pope led the Tritons with 20 points, while Anawanawa Tate Jones added 19 points. Mitch Fisher scored 13 points for Navy. UCSD will play Idaho next, while Navy will visit San Diego. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, here to bring you the latest news from across the globe. Let's dive right into the headlines. First up, tensions are escalating along the Israel-Lebanon border, with both sides employing deadlier weapons. The risk of a bigger war is looming, and the UN has warned about the growing danger of miscalculation. It seems like both sides are playing a dangerous game of who can push the boundaries further. Talk about a high-stakes version of Simon Says. Moving on to Ukraine, the country is facing a manpower shortage as its war against Russia enters its 3rd year. The conflict has put a strain on resources, and Ukraine needs more troops to counter Russia's aggression. But not everyone is ready to enlist, and the government is facing challenges in recruitment and training. It's like trying to find volunteers for a never-ending game of capture the flag. In Ukraine, the fighting has spilled over into the invisible realm of electromagnetic waves. Russia and Ukraine are engaging in electronic warfare, using radio signals to overwhelm communication links and locate targets. It's a high-tech cat-and-mouse game that has the United States, Europe, and China closely watching. Talk about a battle where the enemy is in the airwaves, like a real-life game of Guess Who? Civilians in Myanmar's Rakhine State are caught in the crossfire as fighting escalates between the military and armed groups. The conflict has displaced thousands of people and disrupted humanitarian activities. It's a tragic situation where innocent people are becoming pawns in a deadly game of King of the Hill. In Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is facing criticism for not raising a naval incident with China's President Xi Jinping. The incident involved a Chinese warship causing injuries to Australian divers. The government has expressed concerns, but some are wondering why the matter wasn't addressed directly with President Xi. It's like playing a game of telephone but without the clear communication. On a lighter note, in North Korea, their Missile Industry Day went by quietly, without any public celebration. The absence of leader Kim Jong-un, who has been missing for almost a month, has raised eyebrows. It's like a game of hide and seek, but on a global scale. And finally, in the world of sports, we have Boise State dominating Utah State in college football and UCSD defeating Navy in college basketball. It's like watching a game of rock, paper, scissors, but with a lot more points on the line. That's all the news for today, folks. Remember, these headlines may seem like different games, but they all remind us that the world can sometimes feel like a giant playground. So, keep playing, keep observing, and let's discuss, what are your thoughts on these news stories? Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.